What happens when a late-night comedy legend meets a royal rebel who's burned every bridge back to the palace? You won't believe what unfolds when Prince Harry sits down with Stephen Colbert for what was supposed to be a friendly chat about his latest memoir revelations, only to have it spiral into the most explosive confrontation in late-night television history. The cameras were rolling, the audience was packed, and nobody could have predicted the royal meltdown that was about to unfold live on air. Before we get into this incredible story, make sure you hit that subscribe button and drop a comment below. Because you're not going to believe what unfolds when these two powerhouses clash in ways that will leave you questioning everything you thought you knew about celebrity interviews. The Late Show's studio buzzed with its usual pre-show energy last night, but there was something different in the air. Prince Harry had arrived with his typical entourage, but sources backstage reported he seemed unusually agitated from the moment he stepped into the building. Colbert, known for his sharp wit and fearless approach to controversial topics, had clearly done his homework on the Duke of Sussex's recent public statements about everything from his family drama to his opinions on American politics, but as the show's familiar theme music kicked in and Colbert delivered his opening monologue with characteristic enthusiasm, the audience had no idea they were about to witness television history in the making. The host's jokes about British royalty landed well with the crowd, but those paying close attention might have noticed the slight edge to his commentary about certain royals who've made America their permanent home while still cashing in on their titles. When Prince Harry finally took his seat across from Colbert's desk, the initial pleasantries seemed standard enough. The usual small talk about his flight, the weather, his family life in Montecito. But seasoned viewers of The Late Show could sense something brewing beneath the surface. Colbert's questions, while delivered with his trademark smile, carried an undercurrent of skepticism that Harry seemed to pick up on immediately. "So Harry, let's talk about your latest interviews," Colbert began, leaning back in his chair with that deceptively casual posture that regular viewers know signals he's about to pounce. "You've been quite vocal about your family situation, your mental health journey, your thoughts on privacy, while simultaneously doing very public interviews. Help me understand the logic there." Harry's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly, but his media training kicked in. "Stephen, I think there's a difference between choosing to share your story on your own terms and having it twisted by tabloids who've been stalking your family for decades." Right, Colbert nodded, but his expression suggested he wasn't buying it. "But you've also made some pretty serious accusations about your family, about the institution of the monarchy. Those are some heavy charges to level against people who, correct me if I'm wrong, can't exactly defend themselves publicly the way you can." The studio audience, initially warm and welcoming, began to sense the shift in tone. Harry shifted in his seat, his polished public persona showing the first hairline cracks. "I think it's interesting, Stephen, that you're more concerned about protecting an institution that's been historically oppressive than supporting someone who's trying to break cycles of trauma and abuse." Colbert's eyebrows shot up, and you could practically hear the collective intake of breath from the audience. This wasn't the jovial celebrity chat they'd expected. "Whoa, hold on there," Colbert said, his voice taking on a sharper edge. "I'm not protecting anyone. I'm asking legitimate questions about consistency. You can't have it both ways. You can't demand privacy while writing tell-all books and doing worldwide interview tours. That's exactly the kind of reductive thinking that kept me trapped in that system for 30 years. Harry shot back, his carefully modulated tone beginning to crack. "You're doing exactly what the British press does, trying to silence victims by questioning their methods rather than addressing the actual abuse." The tension in the studio was now palpable. Colbert, who had built his career on fearlessly taking on powerful figures, wasn't about to back down from a prince having a public tantrum on his stage. "Victims? Harry, you're literally a prince. You've lived a life of incredible privilege that 99.9% of the world could never imagine. I'm all for mental health awareness and calling out genuine problems, but there's something deeply tone-deaf about a millionaire prince playing the victim card while sitting in a Montecito mansion." That's when Harry's composure truly began to slip. His face flushed red, and he leaned forward aggressively. "You have absolutely no idea what you're talking about. Privilege doesn't protect you from psychological warfare, from being gaslit by your own family, from watching your mother's legacy being destroyed by the same people who killed her. The studio fell into stunned silence. Even Colbert, rarely at a loss for words, seemed momentarily taken aback by the raw intensity of Harry's response. But this was Stephen Colbert, and he'd faced down presidents and prime ministers. A petulant Prince wasn't going to intimidate him on his own show. "Okay, let's pump the brakes here," Colbert said, his voice now carrying the full weight of his authority as host. "First of all, those are incredibly serious accusations you're making. Second, and I mean this with all due respect, but coming on my show and having a meltdown because someone asked you basic questions about your very public statements isn't exactly helping your case about being ready for adult conversations." Harry's eyes flashed with a dangerous mixture of rage and humiliation. Adult conversations? You're sitting there smugly judging someone's trauma response while making jokes about it for your audience's entertainment. That's not journalism, Stephen. That's exploitation disguised as comedy. The accusation hung in the air like a toxic cloud. Colbert's face hardened, and for the first time in the interview, his famous smile completely disappeared. The audience could feel the shift. This wasn't entertainment anymore. This was two powerful men, each convinced of their own righteousness, heading toward a collision that was going to leave wreckage in its wake. But this was only the beginning of what would become the most talked-about late-night interview disaster in television history, and neither man was prepared for just how ugly things were about to get. The commercial break that followed felt like an eternity to everyone in the studio. While viewers at home saw advertisements for car insurance and fast food, the live audience watched in uncomfortable silence as both men sat rigidly in their chairs, refusing to make eye contact. Production assistants scurried around nervously, whispering frantically into their headsets. This wasn't in the script, and nobody knew how to handle what was rapidly becoming a public relations nightmare for both parties. When the cameras rolled again, Colbert had clearly made a decision. Gone was any pretense of diplomatic interviewing. His expression was stone-cold serious as he addressed his guest directly. "Harry, I want to give you a chance to walk back what you just said, because accusing me of exploitation on my own show is a pretty serious charge." But Prince Harry had clearly spent the commercial break stewing in his own anger rather than considering damage control. If anything, he seemed more agitated than before. "I'm not walking anything back, Stephen. You invited me here under the pretense of having a respectful conversation about my book, about my experiences, and instead you've spent the entire time trying to discredit me and make me look like some kind of spoiled brat for your audience's amusement." "Nobody's trying to make you look like anything," Colbert fired back, his voice rising slightly. "You're doing that all by yourself. I asked you legitimate questions about contradictions in your public statements, and you immediately played the victim card and started throwing around accusations about your family that frankly sound more like therapy sessions than factual claims." The audience was now completely silent, sensing they were witnessing something that had gone far beyond entertainment, into genuinely uncomfortable territory. Harry's face was flushed, his hands clenched into fists on his lap. "Therapy sessions? You're mocking mental health treatment now? This is exactly the kind of toxic masculinity and dismissive attitude that drove me away from that family and that country in the first place." Colbert's patience, legendary among late-night hosts for dealing with difficult guests, finally snapped completely. "Oh, give me a break. You know what's toxic masculinity, Harry? It's a grown man throwing a tantrum on national television because someone asked him to back up his claims with facts instead of just feelings. You want to talk about adult behavior? Adults don't storm around making serious accusations against their families without evidence and then cry foul when someone asks for clarification." "Evidence?" Harry's voice cracked with incredulous rage. "What kind of evidence would satisfy you, Stephen? Should I have been recording private family conversations? Should I have been taking photos of the psychological manipulation? You're asking for evidence of emotional abuse as if it leaves physical scars you can photograph for your little comedy show." The studio felt like it was holding its collective breath. Even the camera operators seemed frozen, unsure whether they should keep rolling or cut away from what was clearly becoming a complete meltdown. Colbert leaned forward, his voice dropping to a dangerously quiet register that regular viewers knew meant he was about to deliver a devastating blow. "You know what, Harry? You're absolutely right about one thing. Emotional abuse is real, it's serious, and it deserves to be taken seriously. But what you're doing isn't raising awareness about abuse. What you're doing is weaponizing the language of trauma to avoid accountability for your own choices and to justify attacking people who can't defend themselves. That's not healing, that's manipulation. The words hit Prince Harry like a physical slap. His face went white, then red, then white again. For a moment, it looked like he might actually get up and leave right then and there. Instead, he did something. Worse, he went nuclear. Accountability? You want to talk about accountability, Stephen? Let's talk about how you've built your entire career on mocking and attacking people more powerful than you while hiding behind the shield of comedy. Let's talk about how you sit in your ivory tower, making jokes about real people's pain and trauma while pretending to be some kind of moral authority. You're nothing but a court jester who thinks his jokes make him wise. The studio erupted in shocked murmurs from the audience. This had crossed every line of talk show etiquette. Guests simply didn't attack hosts like this on their own shows. But Colbert, rather than being intimidated, seemed almost energized by the direct attack. This was his element, political combat disguised as entertainment. A court jester, Colbert's laugh was sharp and humorless. That's rich coming from someone whose entire identity is built around a title he inherited by accident of birth. At least I earned my position through talent and hard work instead of just happening to fall out of the right womb at the right time. Earned your position? Harry was practically shouting now, all pretense of royal composure completely abandoned. You earned your position by being a sycophant to whoever's in power, by making safe jokes that never actually challenged the real systems of oppression. You're exactly the kind of establishment lapdog that keeps real change from happening. The accusation was so far beyond the pale that even some of the audience members began to look genuinely uncomfortable. Several people in the front rows were shifting in their seats, and you could see security personnel beginning to position themselves more strategically around the studio. This wasn't just a heated interview anymore. It was beginning to feel dangerous. Colbert's response was delivered with surgical precision, his voice deadly calm despite the chaos erupting around him. You know what's really sad, Harry? You had everything. You had a platform, you had respect, you had the ability to actually make a difference in the world. And you threw it all away because you couldn't handle the fact that being royal means sometimes you don't get to be the center of attention. Now you're sitting here attacking a comedian because he won't validate your victim narrative. That's not noble rebellion. That's just pathetic. The words seemed to physically stagger Prince Harry. For a split second, he looked less like an angry prince and more like a lost, wounded child. But then the rage reasserted itself, stronger than before, and when he spoke again, his voice was shaking with barely contained fury. Pathetic? You want to know what's pathetic, Stephen? What's pathetic is watching someone who claims to care about truth and justice spend 20 minutes trying to humiliate a trauma survivor for ratings. What's pathetic is watching you perform this little puppet show for your corporate masters while pretending to be some kind of progressive hero. The studio was now in complete chaos, with audience members openly talking among themselves and production staff clearly visible at the edges of the frame, frantically trying to figure out how to handle the situation. But neither man seemed capable of backing down now. They had passed the point of no return, and everyone in the room could sense that something irreversible was about to happen. What happened next would be replayed on social media for weeks and analyzed by television critics for years to come. Prince Harry, his face now completely flushed with rage, stood up abruptly from his chair, pointing an accusing finger directly at Colbert's face. You know what your problem is, Stephen? You're exactly like them. You're exactly like the royal family, like the British press, like everyone who pretended to care about me and William and our mother while secretly enjoying watching us suffer. You hide behind your jokes and your fake concern, but deep down you're just another vulture feeding off other people's pain. The comparison to the people Harry claimed had destroyed his life was clearly the most devastating insult he could think of, and it landed like a bomb in the studio. Several audience members audibly gasped, and you could see Colbert's face go through a rapid series of emotions: shock, hurt, and then a cold, calculating anger that was somehow more frightening than Harry's explosive rage. When Colbert spoke, his voice was quiet but carried across the silent studio like a blade. That's enough. You want to compare me to the people who allegedly ruined your life? Fine. But let me tell you something about vultures. Harry, they only feed on things that are already dead. And looking at you right now, throwing this tantrum on national television, attacking everyone who doesn't bow down to your victimhood narrative, I'm starting to think maybe your critics have a point about what you've become." The words hit Prince Harry like a physical blow. For a moment, he swayed slightly on his feet, and it looked like he might actually collapse back into his chair. But instead, something seemed to break inside him completely, and when he spoke again, his voice was shaking with an emotion that went far beyond anger. "How dare you? How dare you sit there and judge me when you have no idea what it's like to lose your mother to a system that treats people like commodities? No idea what it's like to watch your family choose that system over you, over your wife, over your children. You think this is about victimhood? This is about survival, Stephen. This is about refusing to let the same people who killed my mother destroy my family too." The accusation about his mother's death hung in the air like a toxic cloud, and the studio fell into absolute silence. Even the crew members stopped moving, recognizing that they were witnessing something that had gone far beyond television and into deeply personal, tragic territory. But Colbert, rather than backing down or showing sympathy, seemed to recognize this as the moment when Harry had finally revealed what this was really about. "There it is," Colbert said, his voice still deadly quiet. "That's what this has always been about, hasn't it? Not protecting your wife, not breaking cycles of trauma, not making the world better. This is about you never getting over your mother's death and deciding that gives you the right to burn down everyone and everything around you while claiming it's for their own good." The words seemed to physically stagger Prince Harry. His face went completely white, and for a moment he looked like he might actually faint. Then the color rushed back in a wave of pure fury that was unlike anything anyone in the studio had ever witnessed. "You bastard," Harry whispered, his voice barely audible but carrying clearly in the silent studio. "You absolute bastard. You think you can psychoanalyze me on your little comedy show? You think you understand anything about loss, about grief, about what it means to watch your family choose a corrupt institution over protecting the people they claim to love?" "I think," Colbert replied, standing up slowly to match Harry's height, "that you're a spoiled, entitled man-child who's spent his entire adult life blaming everyone else for his problems while never taking responsibility for any of his own choices. And I think you coming on my show and having this meltdown has proven that better than any interview ever could." That was the final straw. Prince Harry's composure, already hanging by a thread, snapped completely. He grabbed his water glass from the side table, and for a terrifying moment, it looked like he might actually throw it at Colbert. Instead, he slammed it down so hard that water splashed across the desk and onto the floor. "This interview is over," Harry declared, his voice shaking with rage. "I will not sit here and be insulted by some failed comedian who thinks making jokes about real trauma makes him enlightened. You want to know about accountability, Stephen? Here's some accountability. I'm accountable enough to recognize when someone is trying to exploit my pain for entertainment, and I'm not going to participate in it." With that, Prince Harry began pulling off his microphone, his hands shaking so badly he could barely manage the clip. The studio audience was now completely silent, watching in stunned fascination as one of the most famous people in the world had what could only be described as a complete public breakdown. But Colbert wasn't finished. As Harry fumbled with his mic, the host delivered what would become the most quoted line from the entire disaster. "You know, Harry, for someone who claims to be so concerned about breaking cycles of toxic behavior, you sure seem to have perfected the art of running away when things get difficult." Prince Harry froze, his microphone halfway off, and turned to stare at Colbert with an expression of such pure hatred that several audience members actually leaned back in their seats. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely human. "Go to hell, Stephen." With that, he ripped the microphone completely off, throwing it onto his chair, and stormed toward the exit. As he reached the edge of the stage, he turned back one final time, his face a mask of rage and humiliation. "Enjoy your ratings boost," he spat. "I hope it was worth destroying whatever integrity you had left." And then Prince Harry was gone, disappearing behind the stage curtain while the studio sat in absolute stunned silence. For several long seconds, nobody moved, nobody spoke, nobody seemed to breathe. The cameras kept rolling, capturing Colbert as he slowly sat back down at his desk, his face cycling through expressions of shock, regret, and something that might have been satisfaction. Finally, Colbert looked directly into the camera, his voice remarkably steady considering what had just transpired. Well, folks, that's certainly not how we plan to end tonight's show. We're going to take a quick break, and when we come back, we'll have Paul Simon performing his new single. But as the show cut to commercial, everyone in the studio knew they had just witnessed television history. The most explosive celebrity interview meltdown ever captured on live television was complete, leaving both men's reputations in tatters and providing content for late-night comedy shows and social media debates for months to come. Prince Harry had stormed off The Late Show with Stephen Colbert in a blaze of fury and humiliation, and nothing would ever be quite the same for either of them again.